I appreciate the work that you're doing, because as you're describing transhumanism and posthumanism, there's a lot of things that I agree with both that are just like, it's obvious. For instance, my glasses, you can take, I had a conversation with my wife about what transhumanism is. Like, there's so much, like, you can consider the lotion, sunscreen, a form of transhumanism. The FM 2030, he talked about the telepress, like how we're communicating right now. It's a beautiful thing. The prosthetic limbs that we're developing. There's certain other medicines that I may not completely agree with, like what you're saying, their importance of. However, that doesn't mean that they don't have some sort of utility. And when it comes to the posthumanism side, I agree with the idea of respecting animals more. And one example, like you were explaining, we are times are different compared to when we were in tribes. Not to say that there aren't people in tribes currently literally living off of the land, and they tend to take better care of nature than we do. It's kind of funny that that's how it works. They're more in tune with nature. But for instance, like when I see a squirrel outside or something, like when I see a dead squirrel and I'm driving, there's a tinge of like, oh man, that sucks. Like that thing died. Although, I also look at it as food. Like I'm realistic in that regard that, I have no issue killing a squirrel or killing a deer to, feed me and my family. However, there can be a more harmonious balance, which I see that the posthumanists are attempting to do. And I completely agree with you when you're talking about the uploading of consciousness in that 20, 30 years. It's insane to think of. And I find this to be a common theme, though, when it comes to programming and software, that you say this piece of equipment is going to come out next week, but then 2 years later and it's still not out. You see this all the time. For instance, the first thing that comes to my mind is Ethereum. I'm not sure. I know you're familiar with Ethereum because I've seen you with a picture with Vitalik, the co-founder of Ethereum.
I met him a week before he launched Ethereum. We were together for
Wow.
1 week in South Korea, in Daejeon in South Korea. He explained it to me like a week before it was actually launched, which was pretty cool anyway.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so like with Ethereum 2.0, like there's been talk of this for a long time. There's also been talk of this new fork, the London fork, which I won't get too much into, but that's been around since 2017, and people have been expecting it to come right around the corner. So I think we're going to have a similar thing when it comes to uploading consciousness. And I tend to think that I do think that it will come to fruition, but not in the sense that that it's being portrayed. And what I mean is the metaverse that's being developed right in front of our eyes in today's world. I think that you're going to have some form of uploading consciousness from the data being collected from you being in the metaverse, that you'll be able to, maybe your family or something will be able to revive your avatar, and then it'll have your personalities, but it's not necessarily you, but you're in the metaverse. That's what I see more plausible as far as like uploading consciousness. That may seem crazy, whatever. And then as far as like the post-humanist side of things, I do think it's completely insane. It's that you want to get rid of humans because, in my opinion, we're the most resourceful beings on this planet. We're like the most, in my opinion, important beings. I do believe there's hierarchical structures all throughout life, and I believe that humans are at the top of the animal. I do believe we're animals, and I do think that we're just at the top. However, there can be more, as I've already alluded to, and you've already explicitly stated too, that cooperation between species. And I think that we see that when we have dogs, cats, we're more open to keeping these exotic animals as pets now and things of that kind, which people may say is abusive to a certain extent, but nonetheless. Now you're doing like if you could go into more of what the metahuman is or metahumanism is, because I think that like I said at the beginning of this, it's ambitious and it's also realistic, because I think it's like if I understand correctly, the Hegelian dialect, that the truth is like somewhere in the middle typically. And I think that that's kind of what you're attempting to do. I could have a misunderstanding of that, so feel free to correct me, but I feel that that's sort of what you're attempting to do with this school of thought.
Yes, it is. It is. It is based upon certain guidelines, but they are also contingent on a little point. But they are like the guidelines. There's sort of this understanding in the end that there is permanent becoming. There is this permanent flux in which we live. If we want to live a good life, then there's this radical plurality. What might be a good life for you might not be the good life for me, might not be the good life for anyone else. My concept of the good life, the desires and drives, might be entirely only applied to me. There are certain elements which apply to more people, like promoting a longer health span is something which many people identify with the good life, but definitely not all people. That's also something, sort of the avoidance of universality, of making claims concerning any universal validity. That's a very important aspect. Sort of the perspectivism that the things, philosophical judgments we present are interpretations. And so what metahumanism does not attempt to do, it's not a utopia. It's not something we've got the answer and we work towards a utopia. Once these principles are applied in various circumstances, we live in a perfect world. This is not a goal. This is not even this is definitely not something which can be aspired, that undermines actually this metahumanist understanding. So the metahumanism is the metahumanism which Jaime del Val, an artist whom I started that movement, the Spanish intellectual and artist, he's got a different understanding of metahumanism. He's got a different estimation, judgment concerning transhumanism as me. But we share some judgments as the ones concerning perspectivism, plurality, and permanent becoming, and avoiding of violence in this way. And this is these working principles can be applied to many different discourses. So once you enter, it's very different if you talk to the traditional a cardinal here in Rome, or if you talk to someone bioconservative for different reasons, or if you talk to someone who focuses on ecology and preserving certain wildlife species, then you need to find in the various discussions, if everyone just presents their own perspective in a radical manner, there is no possibility of any development, of any adaptation. You need to find some common ground, some common language, something which is being shared, where you resonate with, sort of this resonance with the other, which sort of it stimulates your nerves. It sort of, you realize there is something in this, and then you try to show then what is important, particularly important to you, what is important to the other person. And then the adaptation takes place. Then the thinking is in movement. There's thinking in movement, and people realize, well, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe this is really problematic. You just mentioned the meat thing, meat consumption, and sort of the thinking in relational modes. So I sometimes do that. It's a type of mindfulness meditation, which I do with, in a class. I sort of say, look, this is here beef, a wonderful bistecca Fiorentina, a Florentine steak, or steak from Argentina, and then think about it. Think about where does it come from? What are the various interconnections? And then the people start thinking about, well, there's probably, it's been a factory farm, where these animals were stored, were kept. The animals, they need to pee. They need to, this is like, it sort of enters the soil, and it causes a lot of problems and challenges also to the water, to the earth there. There's a lot of carbon dioxide emissions caused by factory farms. for example, pigs are very social animals, um, and in these conditions, it's really not beneficial for them. They feel the stress in this situation, and it's always they're passing on the diseases easily, which means that you always need to feed them with antibiotics because there's always someone ill. That's why all the pigs need to be given antibiotics all the time. As a consequence of the antibiotics, there's a challenge with in hospitals nowadays and in general that antibiotic resistant cells get created. And that's an enormous challenge. If we don't have the antibiotics, are a wonderful thing. And if they don't work, if we've got antibiotic resistant cells, they kill us. This is something which needs to be taken care of. There are further studies which clearly show that if you consume too much, too much red meat increases your likelihood of getting colon cancer. Cancer is, it's a serious issue. Many people die as a consequence of cancer. And the way animals are killed actually in these circumstances, once you've seen it, you probably turn vegetarian for a couple of days at least. It is, I'm not, the reactions are differently for different people, but I'm just saying, so this is a type of mindfulness meditation just on the issue of, what does that specific piece of meat mean to you? What are the connections to the environment, to your own health, to the well-being of the animals? The animals need to be, the meat needs to be transported. That's another aspect. And so, and that's something which I think ought to be dealt with in schools much further, maybe even, in primary schools. You learn, or in secondary, you learn physics, chemistry, but it's your politics deal with economics, but students don't get the connections. Why is the one thing connected to the other? Why is it relevant? So if you increase the productivity, if you store more pigs in a more limited space, what does it mean? What are the implications? You increase your economic benefits, but actually sort of the health benefits, maybe you wouldn't even want to eat that meat anymore because you need to even give even more antibiotics to that. So it's this way of thinking in establishing relations, understanding, thinking in a relational manner about the various issues which you're being confronted with, and then we need to, then we need to develop ways of dealing with it. And in particular, when we think about, issues like climate change, it's very tricky. I haven't published too much on that because to have a really straightforward answer or to have a good concept, you need to take so many aspects into consideration. It's really extremely different, and you can only do that in a permanent negotiation, taking political circumstances into consideration. And any kind of radical statement, oh, we just need to forbid, whatever, factory farming and, stop building coal power stations, that's naive. That's not going to happen. And the US, Europe, we've benefited obviously on the basis of what we've been doing in the past 200 years. And what's now happening, in particular in China and in India, they're the ones who are now upcoming. China will probably, they have so much innovation. They're publishing each year more peer-reviewed papers, academic papers, than the United States. And that will probably have some economic implications. I think, even as an economic superpower, I find it very hard to imagine that China can be stopped actually so far. But that has already implications concerning financial well-being of the people living there, which means, and which has implications, for example, concerning more people will have the money to buy a car, and they want to drive a car. And usually, together with the financial status, increase of financial status, there's usually, it increases the amount of people eating meat on a regular basis. So more factory farming will be needed in order to produce the meat which, the Indians and the Chinese will